Montana Territory, 1884. The western sky blazed orange and gold as Nathaniel Pierce stood on the porch of his sprawling ranch house, surveying the vast expanse of land that bore his family name. The Pierce cattle empire stretched as far as the eye could see, a testament to 3 generations of ambition, sweat, and calculated risk. Yet for all his wealth, something hollow echoed within him, something no amount of land or cattle could fill. Mr. Pierce, called Jonas, his foreman, interrupting his thoughts. "The new hands are here for your approval." Nathaniel nodded, straightening his crisp white shirt beneath his tailored vest. At 32, he cut an imposing figure, tall and broad-shouldered with eyes the color of worn leather. His father had taught him that first impressions mattered, especially when establishing authority. "Line them up," he ordered, descending the porch steps. 5 men stood in a row, trail-worn and eager for steady work. But it was the 6th figure that caught his attention, slighter than the others, yet standing with unmistakable confidence. A woman. She wore practical men's trousers, a work shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded piercing green eyes. Her auburn hair was tied back in a practical knot. "What is this?" Nathaniel asked, gesturing toward her. Jonas cleared his throat. "This here's Victoria Lawson. Best hand with horses I've seen in years. Came highly recommended from the Callahans spread up north." "I don't employ women as ranch hands," Nathaniel stated flatly. Victoria stepped forward, removing her hat. "With respect, Mr. Pierce, you haven't employed me yet. But I break horses better than any man in 3 territories, and I'm not afraid of long hours or hard work. All I ask is the same pay for the same job." Her directness startled him. Women in these parts were school teachers, shopkeepers' wives, or saloon girls, not ranch hands who spoke to men as equals. "Miss Lawson, the work is unsuitable for—" "Let me demonstrate," she interrupted, nodding toward the corral where a magnificent black stallion paced nervously, still untamed despite weeks of effort by his best men. Nathaniel's curiosity got the better of him. "Very well. Show me what you can do with Thunderclap." No one's been able to ride him for more than 30 seconds. A small smile played at the corner of Victoria's mouth as she replaced her hat and strode confidently toward the corral. The men gathered to watch, exchanging skeptical glances and hushed wagers. Nathaniel leaned against the fence, certain he was about to witness either a humiliating failure or a serious injury. Victoria entered the corral with measured steps, speaking in low tones to the agitated horse. The stallion's ears flicked forward, then back, assessing this unfamiliar human. For nearly 15 minutes, she simply moved around the corral, never approaching directly, but gradually decreasing the distance between them. The ranch hands grew restless, but Nathaniel watched, fascinated by her patience. When she finally touched Thunderclap's neck, the horse trembled but didn't bolt. Another 10 minutes passed before Victoria was stroking his flank, murmuring words too soft for the onlookers to hear. "She hasn't even tried mounting him," muttered one of the hands. "She understands something you don't," Nathaniel found himself saying. "She's earning his trust." When Victoria finally placed a light blanket on Thunderclap's back, the horse merely snorted. After securing a simple hackamore, she gracefully swung herself onto his back in one fluid motion. The stallion stiffened, but didn't buck. Within minutes, she had him walking, then trotting around the corral, responsive to the slightest pressure of her knees. The men watched in stunned silence. When Victoria finally guided Thunderclap to the gate and dismounted, the beast stood calmly beside her, as if they'd been partners for years. "I'll take that job now, Mr. Pierce," she said, her expression serious but her eyes alight with quiet triumph. Nathaniel Pierce, who prided himself on rational business decisions, found himself utterly perplexed by the woman before him. He needed skilled hands, that much was certain, but hiring a female ranch hand would upend every convention of proper society. Yet, as he watched her gentle hand on Thunderclap's powerful neck, one question burned in his mind. What other impossibilities might Victoria Lawson accomplish? "Report to the bunkhouse at dawn," he said finally. "You'll get the same pay as the men, and you'll be expected to do the same work. But the first complaint about your presence causing trouble, and you're gone." Victoria nodded once, her face betraying no emotion save for a slight gleam in her eyes. "Fair enough." As she walked away, leading Thunderclap toward the stable with casual confidence, Nathaniel couldn't help but wonder what storm he'd just invited onto his peaceful ranch. Victoria Lawson learned early in life that the world made little accommodation for a woman alone. Orphaned at 16 when influenza claimed her parents within days of each other, she'd kept their small horse farm running by sheer determination, developing an uncanny ability with even the most difficult animals. When the bank foreclosed 3 years later, she took the only skills she had and set out to make her way. For the past 7 years, she'd drifted from ranch to ranch, staying just long enough to prove her worth before moving on when the inevitable complications arose. Unwanted advances, jealous wives, or simple prejudice. Never in one place long enough to form attachments, she'd built walls around her heart as sturdy as any fortress. The Pierce Ranch was supposed to be just another temporary stop. The position offered good pay, and rumor had it that Nathaniel Pierce, for all his wealth and power, was fair to his workers. She hadn't counted on his penetrating gaze that seemed to see through her carefully constructed defenses, nor his unexpected willingness to judge her solely on her abilities. Her first weeks at the ranch passed in a blur of exhausting work. She rose before dawn, worked alongside the men, and collapsed into her small private room, the former storage space attached to the bunkhouse that Nathaniel had hastily converted for her use, long after sunset. The men initially regarded her with suspicion, but her tireless work ethic and undeniable skill with horses gradually earned their grudging respect. Nathaniel found himself watching her more often than he cared to admit. There was something compelling about the way she moved, efficient, purposeful, with no wasted motion. Unlike the society women he occasionally escorted to town functions, Victoria Lawson had no affectations, no coy smiles or strategic flattery. She spoke plainly, worked hard, and kept to herself. One afternoon, a month after her arrival, Nathaniel found her in the stables, doctoring a young mare's injured leg with focused attention. "You have a gift with them," he observed, leaning against the stall door. Victoria glanced up, momentarily startled by his presence. Animals are simpler than people. They don't lie or pretend to be something they're not. And people do, in my experience. She returned her attention to the mare's leg, applying a poultice with gentle hands. Especially men with power. The implied criticism wasn't lost on him. "You think I'm pretending?" Victoria sighed, finally giving him her full attention. "I think you're playing the role you were born to. The wealthy rancher, the eligible bachelor, the employer. I'm not sure I've met the real Nathaniel Pierce yet." Her frank assessment left him momentarily speechless. Society women simpered and flattered. They didn't challenge his authenticity. "And who is the real Victoria Lawson?" he countered. "The woman who dresses like a man and breaks horses that have thrown my strongest hands." A shadow crossed her face. Someone who learned that the world offers limited options to women without money or connections. "I wear trousers because skirts are impractical for riding. I break horses because it's what I do best." She stood, wiping her hands on a rag. "And I keep to myself because experience has taught me that's safest." Before he could respond, shouts erupted from the direction of the corral. They both rushed outside to find one of the new hands being dragged by a panicked horse, his foot caught in the stirrup. Without hesitation, Victoria sprinted forward, somehow managing to grab the reins and calm the terrified animal before serious injury occurred. As she helped the shaken cowboy to his feet, Nathaniel realized she was bleeding from a gash on her arm where the horse had struck her. "You need that tended," he said firmly when the excitement had died down. "It's nothing," she dismissed, already turning back toward the stable. "That wasn't a suggestion, Miss Lawson." His tone brooked no argument. "My study." Now, in the privacy of his book-lined sanctuary, Nathaniel cleaned the wound with surprising gentleness. Victoria sat rigidly in the leather chair, uncomfortable with both his proximity and being inside the main house, a space ordinarily forbidden to ranch hands. "You could have been seriously injured," he said as he wrapped a clean bandage around her arm. "So could Thomas. It's part of the job. Most women would have screamed or fainted." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "I'm not most women." "No," he agreed, his voice softening as he finished securing the bandage. "You most certainly are not." Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them, a moment of recognition that transcended employer and employee. For the briefest instant, Nathaniel Pierce saw beyond the practical clothing and reserved demeanor to the woman beneath. Intelligent, fiercely independent and undeniably beautiful in her unadorned way. The moment shattered when Jonas appeared at the door with urgent news. Cattle rustlers had been spotted on the North Range. As Victoria slipped away, returning to the anonymity of her duties, Nathaniel found himself wondering what other layers remained hidden beneath her carefully controlled exterior, and why he felt so compelled to discover them. The rustler problem grew worse over the following weeks. 3 neighboring ranches reported significant losses, and twice Pierce riders encountered suspicious men near the property boundaries. Nathaniel doubled the night patrols and sent for additional ammunition from Helena. "We should patrol the North Ridge ourselves tonight," Victoria suggested during one tense strategy meeting. The men have been working double shifts for weeks. They're exhausted. Several hands looked skeptical, but Nathaniel considered her suggestion. "You've had experience with rustlers before?" "In Wyoming. I can track, I can shoot, and I don't fall asleep in the saddle." That night found them riding side by side under a sky brilliant with stars, their breath-forming clouds in the crisp autumn air. They spoke little at first, both alert for any unusual movement in the moonlit landscape. The comfortable silence between them felt significant somehow. Neither felt compelled to fill it with unnecessary conversation. "You never speak of your family," Nathaniel said finally, as they paused to rest their horses near a small creek. Victoria's expression remained carefully neutral. "There's little to tell. My parents had a modest horse farm in Colorado. They died of influenza when I was 16. No siblings. No relatives who could have helped. None close enough to matter." She dismounted to let her horse drink. "I managed the farm alone until the bank took it. After that, I went where the work was." The matter-of-fact way she described such hardship struck him. That couldn't have been easy for a young woman alone. It wasn't. Something vulnerable flickered across her face before disappearing behind her usual composure. But dwelling on difficulties doesn't change them. Nathaniel studied her profile in the moonlight. "Is that why you keep everyone at a distance? Even after months here, none of the men know anything more about you than the day you arrived." She turned to face him directly. "Why are you so interested in my history, Mr. Pierce? Does it affect my ability to do my job?" "No," he admitted. "But perhaps I'm interested in more than just your ability to break horses." The statement hung in the air between them, fraught with implications neither was prepared to acknowledge. Before Victoria could respond, the crack of a distant rifle shot shattered the night stillness. They mounted quickly, riding toward the sound. At the crest of a ridge, they spotted 3 riders herding a small group of Pierce cattle toward the territorial border. "We're outnumbered," Victoria whispered, reaching for her rifle. "We just need to scare them off," Nathaniel replied, drawing his own weapon. What followed was a chaotic exchange of gunfire. Victoria proved herself an excellent shot, forcing the rustlers to abandon the cattle and flee. As they pursued the thieves to ensure they left Pierce land, a final desperate shot from one of the retreating men struck dangerously close. Nathaniel's horse reared in panic, throwing him hard to the ground where he lay motionless. Victoria's heart nearly stopped at the sight of him sprawled upon the earth, unervingly still beneath the cold light of the moon. When Nathaniel regained consciousness, he found himself in his own bed, the first pale light of dawn filtering through the curtains. A sharp pain lanced through his head as he attempted to sit up. "I wouldn't do that just yet," came Victoria's voice from beside the bed. She looked exhausted, dark smudges beneath her eyes suggesting she'd been there through the night. "The doctor says you have a concussion and 2 cracked ribs. You're fortunate it wasn't worse." "The rustlers," he managed, his mouth dry as dust. "Long gone. I had to choose between chasing them or getting you home." A hint of emotion cracked through her composed exterior. It wasn't a difficult decision. She helped him sip water from a glass, her hands steady beneath his. The simple intimacy of the gesture, her fingers brushing his beard-roughened jaw, the concern evident in her eyes despite her attempts to conceal it, created an awareness between them that neither could ignore. "How did you get me back?" he asked. "I managed to get you on my horse and led yours. You regained consciousness briefly about halfway home, though you probably don't remember. You saved my life." Victoria looked away, uncomfortable with his gratitude. "You would have done the same for any of your hands. But you're not just any hand, are you?" The words came unbidden, rough with emotion and lingering pain. Before she could respond, the housekeeper entered with breakfast and fresh bandages, and the moment dissolved into the practicalities of his recovery. Over the following days, as Nathaniel convalesced in his room, Victoria continued her regular duties but returned each evening to report on ranch operations and, though neither acknowledged it openly, to ensure his recovery progressed. These quiet conversations, free from the watchful eyes of the other ranch hands, gradually revealed the complexity beneath their carefully maintained personas. Nathaniel spoke of the crushing expectations that came with being the only son of Ezekiel Pierce, the pressure to expand the ranch empire, and his private doubts about living only for wealth and status. Victoria, in turn, shared fragments of her journey, the humiliations she'd endured, the skills she'd mastered, the dream she still harbored of someday having land of her own. On the evening before the doctor cleared him to return to full duties, Nathaniel watched Victoria as she stood by his window, gazing out at the sunset-painted mountains. "Come to the harvest social with me," he said suddenly. She turned, genuine surprise replacing her usual reserve. "That would be inappropriate. I work for you. I'm not asking as your employer." Victoria shook her head. The gossip would be merciless. The respectable ladies of Helena would be scandalized, and your business associates would question your judgment. "Let them," he said with unexpected vehemence. "I've spent my entire life meeting others' expectations. For once, I want to act according to my own desires." "And what are those desires?" she asked quietly, her voice barely audible. Nathaniel held her gaze steadily. "To spend an evening with the most interesting woman I've ever met. To dance with someone who speaks her mind instead of reciting memorized pleasantries. To discover if what I'm feeling is merely fascination or something deeper." Victoria remained silent for so long he thought she would refuse. When she finally spoke, her voice carried both resolve and vulnerability. "I don't own a suitable dress." It wasn't acceptance, but neither was it refusal. Nathaniel smiled. "I believe that's a problem easily solved." The following day, a package arrived from Helena's finest dress shop with a note requesting Victoria's presence for a fitting. The seamstress, generously compensated for her discretion, asked no questions about altering an elegant emerald gown on such short notice for a female ranch hand. The evening of the social arrived with a flurry of activity. While the other hands departed early, eager for rare entertainment in town, Victoria remained behind, torn between anticipation and trepidation. The woman who stared back at her from the small mirror in her room was almost unrecognizable, the practical trousers replaced by flowing fabric that emphasized her natural grace, her usually restrained hair falling in soft waves around shoulders more accustomed to bearing physical burdens than silk and lace. When she emerged from the bunkhouse, Nathaniel was waiting beside his best carriage. The expression that crossed his face at the sight of her, wonder mixed with something far more potent, nearly stole her breath. "You are beautiful," he said simply. Victoria felt exposed in ways that had nothing to do with the dress. "I feel like an imposter." He offered his hand to help her into the carriage. "Tonight, you're exactly who you choose to be. Nothing more, nothing less." As they rode toward town, Victoria couldn't help but wonder what would happen when this enchanted evening ended, when she returned to being just another hand, and he resumed his position as the untouchable rancher. But for tonight, she decided, she would allow herself this one sweet deviation from the practical path she had always followed. The social was held in Helena's newly constructed town hall, decorated festively with autumn harvest bounty and lit by hundreds of candles. Their entrance caused exactly the stir Victoria had anticipated. Conversations halted mid-sentence, fans fluttered to conceal whispered comments, and more than one matron's disapproving gaze followed their progress across the room. "Everyone is staring," she murmured, fighting the urge to flee. "Let them," Nathaniel replied, his hand warm against the small of her back. "Most of them have nothing more interesting in their lives than others' supposed scandals." Throughout the evening, he remained steadfastly attentive, introducing her simply as Miss Lawson, without explanation or apology. They danced, Victoria surprising herself with remembered steps from her youth, and conversed with the few open-minded guests who approached them. It was during a quieter moment, as they stood on the balcony taking in the cool night air, that Victoria noticed Elias Thornton, the banker who had foreclosed on her family's farm years earlier. Though older now, his pompous bearing was unmistakable. He hadn't recognized her in her transformed state, But the sight of him brought rushing back the pain of that final humiliation, watching strangers pick through her family's possessions at auction. Nathaniel sensed her sudden tension. "What is it?" "Nothing," she said automatically, then reconsidered. "Actually, the man speaking with the mayor, Elias Thornton. He was the banker who took my family's farm." Nathaniel studied the man with newfound interest. Did he follow the letter of the law? Technically, yes. But he refused any extension despite 7 years of timely payments before my parents' deaths. He didn't even allow me to keep my father's pocket watch. The bitterness she thought long buried surfaced unexpectedly. He said a valuable timepiece was wasted on a woman who would only end up someone's wife anyway. Something dangerous flashed in Nathaniel's eyes. Before Victoria could stop him, he was striding purposefully toward Thornton, exchanging pleasantries with practiced ease. She watched in confusion as the two men conversed, Thornton's expression changing from pompous satisfaction to barely concealed anxiety. When Nathaniel returned to her side, his expression revealed nothing. "Shall we dance again?" "What did you say to him?" she demanded quietly. "I merely mentioned that my banking business, which is substantial, might be better placed with an institution that values compassion alongside profit." His smile held a predatory edge. "And I may have inquired about a certain pocket watch that might be languishing in his possession." Victoria stared at him, conflicting emotions rendering her momentarily speechless. No one had ever defended her interests so decisively, yet she'd spent years building self-reliance. "I don't need rescue, Nathaniel." It was the first time she'd used his given name, and it hung in the air between them, intimate and significant. "It isn't rescue to use one's position to right a wrong," he countered. "You've earned your independence through remarkable courage. That doesn't mean you must face every battle alone." Before she could formulate a response, a commotion near the entrance drew everyone's attention. Jonas, still in his work clothes and visibly agitated, was scanning the room. When he spotted Nathaniel, he pushed through the crowd with urgent purpose. "Fire at the ranch," he announced without preamble. "The north barn, and it's spreading fast. All hands are fighting it, but I thought you should know." The enchanted evening shattered. Within minutes, they were in the carriage, racing back toward the Pierce ranch, where an ominous orange glow already lit the horizon. Chaos greeted them at the ranch. The north barn, which housed not only hay and equipment, but also the most valuable breeding horses, was engulfed in flames. Men formed a bucket brigade from the well, but the fire showed no signs of relenting. Victoria didn't hesitate. She leaped from the carriage before it fully stopped, kicking off her delicate shoes and gathering her skirts. "The horses," she shouted. "Miss Lawson, it's too dangerous," called Thomas, one of the hands. She ignored him, darting toward the smaller side door where smoke billowed less densely. Nathaniel caught up with her, grabbing her arm. "Victoria, no." She turned to him, her expression resolute. "Thunderclap is in there. And the pregnant Mares. I can reach them through the back stalls." Before he could protest further, she pulled away, tearing a strip from her fine dress to cover her mouth and nose before disappearing into the smoke. Inside, the heat was overwhelming, and visibility reduced to mere feet. Victoria crouched low, navigating by memory to the stalls where she knew the valuable horses were kept. The animals were panicked, rearing and kicking at their enclosures. Thunderclap recognized her voice even through his terror. With shaking hands, she opened his stall, gripping his halter and leading him toward the exit. After delivering him to waiting hands outside, she plunged back in repeatedly, managing to free 4 more horses before a supporting beam crashed down, blocking the path she'd been using. Coughing violently, eyes streaming, she realized she was now cut off from the main exit. The smoke was thickening, making each breath increasingly painful. As consciousness began to fade, she heard Nathaniel calling her name, his voice desperate above the roar of the flames. Then strong arms were around her, lifting her, carrying her through an alternative route she hadn't seen. Nathaniel had come for her, risking his own life without hesitation. Outside, they collapsed on the ground, both coughing and gasping for clean air. The ranch hands continued their battle against the blaze, but it was clear the barn couldn't be saved. Their focus shifted to preventing the fire from spreading to nearby structures. "Don't ever do that again," Nathaniel said when he could speak, his voice raw from smoke and emotion. Despite the danger just past, He couldn't take his eyes off her soot-streaked face. I thought I'd lost you. Victoria, still struggling to breathe properly, found herself overwhelmed by the naked fear and relief in his expression. The horses, damn the horses, he interrupted fiercely. They can be replaced. You cannot. The unexpected declaration hung between them, weighted with implications neither had fully acknowledged until this moment of crisis stripped away pretense. By dawn, the fire was finally extinguished, leaving nothing but smoldering ruins where the barn had stood. Miraculously, thanks to Victoria's courage, most of the valuable horses had been saved, though 2 older workhorses had perished despite rescue attempts. As the exhausted ranch hands dispersed to catch what sleep they could before regular duties resumed, Nathaniel insisted on having the doctor examine Victoria for smoke inhalation. Her elegant dress was ruined beyond repair, torn and blackened by soot and ash. The fire wasn't accidental, Jonas reported grimly when they gathered in Nathaniel's study later that morning. Found coal oil splashed around the outside wall and boot prints heading toward the north ridge. Rustlers? Nathaniel asked, his expression hardening. Jonas shook his head. Don't think so. Rustlers want to steal, not destroy. Then who? Victoria asked, her voice still raspy from the smoke. She sat wrapped in a borrowed blanket, having changed back into her usual attire. Could be the Dunnigan outfit, suggested Thomas. They've wanted Pierce water rights for years. Or someone who didn't appreciate seeing your ranch hand being treated like a lady at the social. Jonas added carefully, glancing between Nathaniel and Victoria. The implication was clear. Their unconventional behavior had potentially made the ranch a target. Victoria felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. She'd allowed herself one evening of fantasy, and it may have endangered everything Nathaniel had built. I should go, she said quietly when they were alone again. Nathaniel looked at her sharply. Because of the fire? That's absurd. Is it? You heard Jonas. Someone may have targeted your property because of me, because of us being seen together at the social. She stood, wincing slightly at her various minor injuries. I've stayed in one place too long already. It's time I moved on. Running away is your solution? There was unexpected anger in his voice. After everything that's happened between us? Nothing has happened, she countered, though they both knew it for a lie. I work for you. We attended one social event. You rescued me from a fire I foolishly entered. And you think that's all this is? He moved closer, his gaze intense. Victoria, when I saw you run into that burning building, I realized something that terrifies me far more than any fire. What? She whispered, unable to look away from him. That I've fallen in love with you. Not with the woman in the emerald dress, though she was enchanting, but with the Victoria who breaks wild horses and speaks her mind and refuses to be limited by others' expectations. His voice softened. The woman who went back into a burning barn 5 times to save animals she loves. Victoria felt her carefully constructed defenses crumbling. 7 years of independence, of keeping emotional entanglements at bay, hadn't prepared her for the raw honesty in Nathaniel's declaration. It would never work, she said, though her resolve was weakening. The wealthy rancher and his female hand? Society would never accept it. I don't give a damn about society's acceptance. He gently took her hands in his. I care about building a life with someone who challenges me, who sees me as a man rather than a fortune, who shares my love for this land. Before she could respond, hurried footsteps approached the study door. It was Thomas, his expression grim. Rider coming fast, he announced. It's Sheriff Morgan, and he looks like he means business. Nathaniel and Victoria exchanged concerned glances. What new complication was galloping toward them now? Sheriff Morgan dismounted with the stiff movements of a man who'd spent too many hours in the saddle. His expression was grave as he removed his hat, nodding toward the charred remains of the barn. Heard about your trouble, he said to Nathaniel. That why you sent your man to my office last night? Nathaniel frowned. I didn't send anyone. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. Fellow claimed to work for you. Said there was evidence about cattle rustling and the fire. Evidence that implicated Victoria Lawson. Victoria felt the blood drain from her face. That's preposterous. Nevertheless, I need to ask some questions. The sheriff turned to Nathaniel. Privately. To his credit, Nathaniel didn't hesitate. Whatever you have to say can be said in front of Miss Lawson. Sheriff Morgan sighed. then reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a folded paper. Got this from a man claiming to be your employee. It's a wanted poster from Wyoming Territory for a horse thief named Victoria Lawson. The shock that rippled through Victoria was physical, like a blow to the chest. That's impossible. I've never stolen anything in my life. The sheriff handed the poster to Nathaniel, who studied it with increasing consternation. The crude illustration bore only a passing resemblance to Victoria, but the name and description were specific. It says here that 3 years ago, a Victoria Lawson stole 4 valuable horses from the Double Crown Ranch in Wyoming Territory. Nathaniel read, his voice carefully neutral. Reward of $200 for her capture. Victoria's mind raced. 3 years ago, I was working at the Callahan spread near Fort Benton. A dozen people can verify that. Maybe, the sheriff allowed. But I need to investigate these charges. In the meantime, I should take you into custody. That won't be necessary, Nathaniel interjected firmly. I'll vouch for Miss Lawson personally. She's not going anywhere. The sheriff hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. Nathaniel, I've known your family for 20 years, but I can't ignore a legitimate warrant, even from another territory. It's a forgery, Victoria insisted, examining the poster more closely. Look at the paper, it's too new. And that's not an official territorial seal. Sheriff Morgan took the paper back, studying it with greater scrutiny. You seem to know a lot about official documents. My father was a county clerk before he took up farming, she explained. I used to help him prepare papers. That seal is wrong. Wyoming Territory's seal has 13 stars, not 12. The sheriff's expression shifted from suspicion to interest. That still doesn't explain why someone would forge a wanted poster with your name on it. I think I might know, Nathaniel said slowly. Victoria, that banker from last night, Thornton. You said he foreclosed on your family's farm. Where was that exactly? Near Laramie, she answered, realization dawning. In Wyoming Territory. And the Double Crown Ranch. It was adjacent to our property. They tried to buy our land for years before my parents died. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Elias Thornton is brother-in-law to Silas Crown, the Double Crown's owner. Sheriff Morgan frowned. You think this Thornton fellow forged a wanted poster because of some old property dispute? Not just that, Nathaniel explained. Last night, I threatened to withdraw my considerable banking business from his institution if he didn't make amends for his treatment of the Lawson family. I may have also mentioned certain banking practices I've observed that would interest territorial regulators. So he fabricated charges to discredit Miss Lawson, the sheriff concluded. That's a serious crime in itself. Will you give us time to prove it? Nathaniel asked. Sheriff Morgan considered for a moment, then nodded reluctantly. 3 days. But Miss Lawson stays here at the ranch, and if I don't have proof by then, I'll have no choice but to take her to Helena until this can be sorted out. After the sheriff departed, Victoria sank into a chair, still processing this unexpected threat. I need to leave, she said quietly. Tonight, before this gets worse. That would only make you look guilty, Nathaniel countered, kneeling before her. We'll fight this together. Why? The word contained all her confusion, her fear of allowing herself to need anyone. Why risk your reputation, your business relationships, for me? I thought I made that clear earlier. He took her hands in his. I love you, Victoria. Not for a season or a year, but for a lifetime. If you'll have me. The sincerity in his voice threatened to undo her completely. You don't know what you're saying. Your life would be simpler without. Simpler, yes. Also emptier. His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. Before you came, I had wealth and land, but little joy. You've reminded me what it means to live with passion, to stand for something beyond profit and status. Victoria felt tears threatening, tears she hadn't allowed herself in years. What if they take me away? What if we can't prove the poster is fake? Then I'll follow you to Wyoming or wherever else they send you, and I'll clear your name. His certainty was unshakable. But first, we need to find who started that fire. I suspect the answers are connected. The next 3 days passed in a whirlwind of investigation and strategy. Nathaniel sent telegrams to Fort Benton confirming Victoria's employment during the period in question. Jonas and 2 trusted hands tracked the mysterious boot prints from the fire site to an abandoned line shack on the property's northern edge, where they discovered evidence that someone had been living there intermittently for weeks, watching, waiting. Most damning of all was a scrap of paper bearing the same handwriting as the forged wanted poster, apparently discarded in haste. Someone's been planning this, Nathaniel concluded as they gathered in his study the night before the sheriff's deadline. The fire was meant to create chaos, maybe even kill some of us. The wanted poster was a backup plan to remove Victoria if the fire failed. But why? Victoria asked. What does Thornton gain from all this? Before Nathaniel could respond, they heard the thunder of approaching horses. Jonas burst into the study without knocking. Riders coming fast from the North Ridge, he reported. At least 6 men, armed. Nathaniel moved swiftly to the gun cabinet. Get the men together. Anyone who can shoot. He handed Victoria a rifle. Can you still hit what you aim at? She checked the weapon with practiced hands. Better than most of your cowboys. They had barely taken defensive positions when the riders burst into the ranch yard, firing wildly at the main house. The attack was bold, clearly intended to overwhelm through shock and violence rather than stealth. That's Silas Crown. Victoria shouted over the gunfire, recognizing the lead rider despite the years that had passed. Thornton's brother-in-law. The ensuing gunfight was brief but intense. The Pierce hands, forewarned and well-positioned, quickly gained the upper hand. When one of Crown's men fell wounded, the others retreated, dragging their injured companion. They'll be back, Jonas predicted grimly, reloading his rifle. Not if we end this now, Nathaniel decided. Victoria, stay here with half the men. Jonas and I will ride for the sheriff. I'm coming with you, she insisted. I know Crown. I know what he's capable of. Nathaniel recognized the determination in her eyes. We ride in 5 minutes. The journey to Helena was tense, every shadow potentially concealing Crown's men. They reached the sheriff's office near midnight, finding Morgan still awake and reviewing wanted posters. Pierce, what brings you? He stopped, seeing their expressions. What's happened? They quickly explained the attack, presenting the evidence they'd gathered about the forged poster and the fire. The sheriff listened intently, his frown deepening. Crown and Thornton, he mused. That explains why Thornton was asking so many questions about your ranch holdings last month. Word is his bank is failing, and Crown's ranch has been losing money for years. My land borders theirs in Wyoming, Victoria added. With the railroad coming through next year, that property would be worth 10 times what they paid when the bank foreclosed. And with me and Victoria out of the way, either dead or discredited. Nathaniel continued. Pierce Ranch would likely go to auction, where Thornton's bank could manipulate the bidding. The sheriff finished, standing abruptly. We need to move fast. They've already shown they're willing to kill. By dawn, Sheriff Morgan had assembled a posse including deputies from neighboring counties. They found Elias Thornton attempting to flee on the early stage to Bozeman, carrying bank documents and a suspiciously large sum in cash. Under questioning, facing multiple charges including fraud and conspiracy, Thornton broke, implicating Crown in both the fire and the attack. Crown wanted the Wyoming property back, he confessed. Said with the railroad coming, he'd be rich if he controlled both pieces of land. When we heard Pierce was getting sweet on the Lawson woman, we saw an opportunity. Get rid of them both, buy the land cheap at auction. With Thornton's confession, the sheriff organized a larger force to apprehend Crown and his men, who had retreated to an abandoned mining camp in the foothills. Victoria insisted on accompanying them, despite Nathaniel's concerns. He stole my family's legacy, she said quietly. I need to see this through. The confrontation at the mining camp was tense, but ultimately anticlimactic. Outnumbered and surrounded, Crown surrendered rather than face a hopeless gun battle. As the sheriff's men led him away in handcuffs, he spat at Victoria's feet. Should have killed you years ago, when you were just a stubborn girl refusing to sell, he snarled. Victoria regarded him calmly, her posture straight and proud. My father always said land outlasts men, Mr. Crown. He was right. As they rode back toward Pierce Ranch, the immediate danger behind them, Nathaniel found himself watching Victoria. Despite exhaustion etched in every line of her body, there was a new lightness to her, as if a burden carried for years had finally been set down. What happens now? He asked as they crested the final ridge. The ranch buildings spread below them in the golden afternoon light. Victoria considered the question, her eyes taking in the vast expanse of land that had become more than just a workplace to her. I suppose I should think about finding my own place. Now that my name is cleared, I could file a homestead claim. Or you could stay, Nathaniel suggested carefully. Not as a ranch hand. She turned to him, a question in her eyes. I meant what I said before, Victoria. I love you. Your strength, your determination, your compassion disguised as practicality. He guided his horse closer to hers. I'm not offering charity or protection. I'm offering partnership in every sense of the word. People will talk, she warned, though a smile tugged at her lips. Let them. He reached across the space between them, taking her hand. The rich cowboy has indeed met his match in the strong-willed ranch hand. The only question is, will she have him? Victoria Lawson, who had spent 7 years keeping the world at arm's length, finally allowed herself to embrace the future opening before her. A future with a man who saw her exactly as she was and loved her for it. Yes, she said simply. I believe she will. They were married the following spring in a simple ceremony on the ranch, with wildflowers blooming across the valleys and the mountains still capped with snow. Victoria wore a practical but elegant cream dress, refusing the elaborate fashions that would have made her feel like an imposter. Nathaniel waited for her beneath an arch of newly leafed branches, his expression one of undisguised joy when she approached on horseback rather than in a traditional carriage. The guests included ranch hands, neighboring farmers, and even a few society matrons who had decided that true love trumped convention. Sheriff Morgan stood as witness, having become a friend through the ordeal that had ultimately brought them together. Most meaningful to Victoria was the gift Nathaniel presented the morning of their wedding. Her father's pocket watch, recovered from Thornton's possessions and restored to working order. As she held the familiar weight in her palm, feeling the engraved initials of the father she had lost too soon, she realized that the broken pieces of her past had somehow been gathered and made whole again. Their vows were straightforward but heartfelt. They promised to face life's challenges together, to respect each other's independence while cherishing their connection, to build a legacy worthy of the land they both loved. I take you not to possess, but to partner with, Nathaniel said, his voice carrying across the assembled guests. Not to complete me, but to complement me. Not because I need rescue, but because life is richer with you riding beside me. Victoria, who had once believed that vulnerability was weakness, found herself moved beyond words by his declaration. When she spoke, her voice was clear and strong, like everything about her. I take you not as refuge from the world, but as companion in facing it. Not as protector, but as ally. Not because I cannot stand alone, but because I choose not to. As they sealed their vows with a kiss, a cheer rose from the gathered witnesses, a celebration not just of love found, but of barriers broken and conventions challenged. In the years that followed, the Pierce Ranch prospered under their joint stewardship. Nathaniel's business acumen, combined with Victoria's practical knowledge of animal husbandry, created an operation respected throughout the territory. They faced droughts, harsh winters, and market fluctuations with the same determined partnership that had brought them together. When their first child was born, a daughter with her mother's determined spirit and her father's thoughtful eyes, they named her Eleanor, after Victoria's mother. She grew up learning both to manage accounts and to break horses, equally at home in the saddle and the study. 2 sons followed, each finding their own place in the family legacy while being taught that true strength came in many forms. On warm summer evenings, long after the day's work was done, Nathaniel and Victoria could often be found sitting together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. Sometimes they spoke of the future, expansions planned, improvements envisioned. Other times they reminisced about that fateful day when a woman in men's clothing tamed a horse no one else could ride, and in doing so, began to tame the heart of a man who hadn't known he needed changing. And occasionally, they would ride together to the highest ridge on the property, where the whole valley spread before them like a promise kept. There, with the wind in their hair and the vast Montana sky above, the rich cowboy and his strong-willed match would remind each other that the greatest adventures come not from conquering new territories, but from having the courage to let someone truly know your heart.